Now, I've been getting a lot of comments on my videos with people asking which domain should I get inside Jujutsu Infinite. Now, inside this game, each domain kind of has its own special perk, and I feel like you can make the argument that you should use you could honestly use any domain, but specifically for this video, I'm going to be telling you which domain you should be getting depending on which side of the game you prefer more. If you prefer the game for like a more grinding aspect, I'll be talking about domains for that. And if you prefer domains focused more on the PvP side, I'll be talking about that as well. Now, to be like blunt with you, I'm just going to like generalize everything. So when I'm talking about a certain domain, I'm also going to be talking about it for both PvE and PvP. There's not going to be certain sections for each of them. And I'm also just going to be giving you my personal thoughts on each domain and how I would go about choosing my own domain. So to start off, I feel like an easy and simple domain to judge off the start would honestly be Judgeman. Now, Judgeman, how this domain works is you essentially trap your opponent inside of a courtroom, and basically you engage in rock, paper, scissors against a person. Thank you to the people in the comments who actually pointed out to me some of the things that happen when you actually win or tie inside this domain. But essentially for this domain, if you win, you get the Executioner Sword. So to briefly go over the Executioner Sword, it is an essentially you win card. If you get the Executioner Sword, your M1s do insane amounts of damage. I'm pretty sure when I was testing it, my M1s was doing around 2,000 to 3,000 damage per M1. Along with that, you also have a one-shot skill. So if you get the Executioner Sword, you're going to kill the person. Now when you're also using Judgment, if you tie against the person that you're using Judgment on, the curse technique is confiscated, and if you lose the rock, paper, scissors, you just get regular domain buffs, being speed and defense. So if you wanted to use this domain being Judgment, I would honestly say that this domain is more orientated on a PvP side. If you want to use this domain for PvE, do not do it, because you'll just be trapping like 1 to 2 NPCs inside. And yes, the Executioner Sword is a gamble, but you have a 33% chance of winning, and you have a 66.66666% chance of losing. I don't know why you would want to risk that, especially using your one domain shard that you get, or just probably one domain shard that you probably have, because they're pretty rare, and you want to use a domain like this. I would honestly say that this is a more PvP oriented domain, and even then, when it's more PvP orientated, it's not like it's going to be the best. You are actually gambling more inside this domain than Gambler Fever. So yeah, this domain to me, I would only get it if you really are a fan of Higuruma and you like the way that the domain works and you don't mind missing sometimes. Now the second domain is one that I feel like is going to be slightly underrated, and this is going to be Volcano. So essentially when you pop this domain, you're creating a coffin of the Iron Mountain. And within this domain, everything or everyone caught inside of it will have passive burn damage applied to them over time. So one thing to note with this domain is that one of your skills, and I'm pretty sure it's being Volcano or Fissure or Molten Chamber, is essentially the skill that you use when you leap up high inside the air. Now when you use this skill, you create magma puddles all over the floor, and these magma puddles just do insane amounts of burn damage. And this is being stacked on top of the burn damage that the domain passively just gives for somebody being inside of it. This domain, I feel like it's going to be underrated, not only because of like it being a legendary, but also because of Jogo, the person who uses this domain. This domain expansion is honestly good. It is honestly just a solid, good domain. If you want a domain for PvE, I feel like this one could honestly probably be the best domain for PvE, excluding one more. So if you want to get a domain that's probably mainly focused for PvE, I would honestly recommend this because it's going to be good. And this is honestly just like a really safe pick. You can't go wrong with this domain because you can also use it in PvP. It's not going to be the best for PvP because people can kind of stay inside the air for long amounts of time. So your one skill that just changes inside domain being like Molten Chamber, causing huge amounts of magma spots on the ground, it could hit the person, but there's honestly better PvP domains. So this domain to me is like alright for PvP. If I was putting it on a scale of 1 to 10, I'll put this domain at like a 5 to a 6 for PvP, unless you're using like some crazy combination with different techniques. Keep in mind also, I'm kind of basing these domains off of like the one technique itself. I'm not like thinking about you using Jogo's domain while also using Hollow Purple or something at the same time. This is just me like basing the domains in general. So Jogo's domain is honestly very good. Like I said, if you want just a solid domain that can do both, I would honestly recommend this domain, and it's not bad to pick up. Our next domain, or the last legendary one, is going to be Hydrokinesis. So just to note off rip, one thing that Hydrokinesis has is a passive which is going to be wet, and this just causes the person to move slower and deal less damage. So when you pop this domain expansion, only one of your skills is going to be the short hit of it, and this is going to be Death Swarm. Now Death Swarm, it's essentially you sending a bunch of piranhas or just fish biting your opponent, causing the wet status effect while also causing bleed to the person. So this domain is honestly pretty alright to me. It's my personal favorite mainly because of how it looks, but to me the wet status effect, if you're going to be using this for PvE, why would you need to lower the speed for your opponent? The one good thing about the wet passive effect is that it will do less damage to you, but I feel like if you're popping a domain expansion, you don't want to do less damage to the person, or you don't want to like passively nerf the person, you want to kill them. So for PvE, this domain is probably just alright. The thing about Death Swarm is that you can honestly only use it like 2 to 3 times in your domain, and this is me not counting in like the passive effect for the stat tree where you can get an extra 30 seconds. But it's just really like you have a decent cooldown for your only short hit inside the domain, and once you're done using that short hit, you're honestly just fighting the person. Like you are straight up just boxing the person. So bringing this over to PvP, I honestly wouldn't recommend this domain for PvP. If you're going to be using this domain for PvP, you should honestly be using it as like an actual fight closer. Like you are 1000% sure that once you land Death Swarm, the person will be dead, because they can use RCT inside your domain if they just get the chance to, and if they also have simple domain, then your domain is completely useless because Death Swarm does not, like, you literally can't touch them. So to me, this domain is honestly like lackluster to mid. I honestly wouldn't use it for PvP or PvE. Moving on from that, we have Star Rage. Now, one thing to note about Star Rage is that when you're inside the domain, your passive, which is going to be your mass meter, will be at 100% permanently filled for the entire duration of the domain. And the thing with Star Rage is that the damage on these skills is absolutely insane. If you honestly want to use a domain that has like, I don't want to call the skills unavoidable, but if they're pretty unavoidable, then Star Rage for PvP would honestly just be a very solid domain. This domain, it also applies a 10% debuff on the person, so when you actually do hit them with your mass amplified skills, which have huge AoE, you are guaranteed to do a lot of damage. I fought my friend who was using Star Rage, and each of his skills inside his domain was doing around 1500 to 2000 damage per skill that hit me. Along with that, if you do have the maximum for Star Rage, this domain only gets better because you're essentially going to be one-shotting them without actually killing yourself. This domain for PvP, it's super good. If you use this domain for PvP, you will most likely end up killing the opponent from max HP if you pop it when they're like max HP or something. This domain's super duper good. And even for PvE, I can honestly see it being pretty decent as well. I don't think it's going to be the best for PvE, but this domain would be a solid pick. If I was to rate it for like PvP, I would honestly give it like a 9 or like an 8, maybe even a 10, because of just how good it is at applying pressure to your opponent. You like make them weaker. And then also for PvE, you just debuff the person, and since it's an AI, it's not like it's going to be running away from you or going to be that far away from you. You will also be hitting them with your huge massive skills. If you choose this domain, you honestly will just be doing yourself a benefit. You can't go wrong with this domain. It's honestly super duper good. Our next domain we have is going to be Unequivocal Love, or also just the copy domain, yutas domain expansion. Now within this domain expansion, you basically get the ability to summon katanas, and each katana will have a random move, and you also can't switch the katana's moves until you use the moves for each katana. So this domain is kind of like RNG. You can roll multiple skills. You can roll Hollow Purple, you can roll Knife Frenzy, you can roll Blood Manipulation, you can roll any skill from any curse technique inside this domain. But the thing about it is that this is all just RNG. It is essentially you gambling with a very, I'm gonna call it gambling, but it's a very fast gamble because you can literally just equip the katana and use the skills, but it's just you rolling until you get a super duper good skill. I feel like this domain is just meant to like apply pressure when you're fighting an actual person. So regarding PvP, I feel like it's meant to apply pressure because the person does not know what's going to come next. Meaning you can hit them with like one skill and then they can turn around and be hit with like the most broken skill inside the game. So creating this kind of like mind game when you're fighting your opponent is honestly going to be super duper good, because they essentially don't know how to defend against something that they've never seen before or don't know what you're going to pull out. So this domain is honestly pretty good for PvP. I wouldn't call it the best. I think it's just good for PvP. I would put it at like a 8 to a 7 for PvP, solely because of the fact that you can roll any technique. But also, if you're just fighting somebody who's inherently better than you at the game, they're probably going to kill you while you're inside this domain, regarding the fact that you don't know how to use like every skill from every single curse technique. So outside of that, moving on for PvE, this domain expansion probably would not be good for PvE at all. You're just going to be rolling different skills, so it's not like you'll be able to roll a hollow purple every single time and one shot whatever boss you're fighting. So for PvE, I would say that this domain expansion kind of sucks, and I would only use this domain expansion for PvP. But if you're using it for PvP, do not expect it where it's like if you pop this domain expansion, oh, you're just going to win the fight. You're still going to have to fight your opponent inside this domain expansion. You're just going to have to fight them with the added mind games that you could play along. Now the next domain expansion is going to be my personal favorite, and I feel like an overall safe domain expansion for any aspect of this game. And this domain expansion is going to be Malevolent Shrine. Now, to keep it very simple, this domain expansion is just a domain where you create a bunch of endless slashes. The short hit of the domain is literally you just slashing the opponent for, I'm pretty sure, a minute. This domain expansion lasts super duper long, and even though the damage is pretty small with it, dealing like around anywhere from 30 to 70 per hit with the slashes, it just lasts for a very long time. This domain expansion, I feel like, is perfect for PvE. No matter what you do or any boss that you pop this domain expansion on, since bosses do not block inside this game, the bosses will just be eating passive damage over time no matter what you do. This domain expansion is super duper good for PvE. I have it at number 1 on PvE, and following that I would place Jogo's domain for PvE, but this domain expansion is definitely number 1 for PvE. If you want to grind bosses effectively or do anything effectively inside this game, get this domain expansion. You will be doing yourself the biggest favor ever. Now, regarding PvP, it's definitely good. Honestly, for PvP, I think it's really good. Other people will probably tell you that it's more like it's good, but like there's better. But for me, I would place this at 1 for my PvP. For my PvP tier list, I would place this at 1. Specifically me. And the main reason as to why I'm doing this is because of the pressure that this domain is going to put you in. So like I stated, you can block the slashes inside this domain, but when you're blocking the slashes, it's not like the person who used it on you is just going to sit there and let you block it. This domain puts you inside the ultimate 50-50. Now, one side of it being, are you going to take the slashes and continue fighting the opponent hoping that you can kill them? Or are you going to sit there and block the slashes and hoping that you're able to just defend against the person, outlasting them inside their own domain expansion? Now, as a person who's been hit by this domain expansion, if you try to do the defensive option, you will most likely get sniped with a cleave, guard broken, and continue eating more slashes. This domain is honestly beautiful because it works in both ways. You can play this domain as a Sukuna player and just go sit back and heal and play more passive, or you can play this domain as like an aggressive person who's just going to run at the person the second you pop this domain expansion and make sure that they die in it. It's honestly very beautiful at what it does. I would highly rate this domain for both PvP and PvE, and if you get it, I do appreciate you a little bit more because I like Sukuna. Now, next domain expansion is going to be Gambler Fever, and this domain expansion, it's the one domain expansion that you can pop without having any meter whatsoever. So you can start off a fight and just run up, press G, and pop this domain expansion. This domain expansion is super duper good. But the main thing about it is the fact that you need to fill up your fever meter. Now, your fever meter, this is your meter that you need to fill up so that you can get infinite RCT. And by infinite RCT, I'm basically saying that your HP won't die and you're unkillable. And also, when you're inside this infinite RCT mode, you also have reduced cooldowns on your innate techniques. So if you're able to get the infinite RCT or infinite HP mode, you also have reduced cooldowns on your skill. This domain could turn you into a beast, but for PvE, I would honestly rate it as like, I would say like a probably 6 or 7 out of 10, because you can get this mode and you won't die to the boss at all, and you'll also have reduced cooldowns. But there's domains that just perform PvE naturally better than Gambler Fever. So for PvE, I think it's like okay. I'll probably rate it like a 6. I'll probably rate it like a 6 out of 10 for PvE, or honestly maybe a 5 out of 10. I'm only rating it that high because you literally can't die to the boss. Also regarding PvP, I don't think I need to talk about how annoying it would be to fight somebody who's like unkillable for a minute and 30 seconds, but just in case there's some people who need it, if you have infinite HP and you're fighting somebody, you can't really lose the fight unless you suck at the game. So yeah, for PvP, this domain, I would honestly rate it like an 8 out of 10, because if they domain clash you and they beat you inside your domain clash, then you will honestly just have to wait like 45 seconds before you can clash against their domain again. And since you don't need a meter to cast your domain expansion, they most likely won't have theirs fill up to 100% again, so you will guaranteed land this domain at least once inside of your fights. Now the second to last domain, and another one of my personal favorites, is going to be Self Manipulation. And regarding the domain, it's going to be Self-Embodiment of Perfection. Now within this domain, anybody that you attack will have these little transfigured orbs stacked on them, and that's like these little ball effects that just happen to get on the person if you hit them with any auto transfiguration skills, and regarding the domain, if you hit them with any M1. But the main thing about this domain is that it's kind of like Hydrokinesis, and you only have one skill to do a huge amount of damage to them. This skill being Soul Touch. Now Soul Touch, if you just use it raw inside the domain with no orb stacks on the person at all, it will do okay-ish damage. I'll probably say like what, 500 to 800 damage, which is honestly alright. It's not the most, but if you're able to get a good combo off on the person, and this is regarding PvP inside this domain, and probably even PvE, and you just burst all the transfiguration stacks that you have, you can do up to like 4k to 3k damage with just one Soul Touch, and you can use Soul Touch a lot of times inside this domain expansion. This domain is good. For PvE, I would rate it like a 6.5 to a 7 out of 10. It's not going to be the best for PvE because you will honestly have to like M1 the thing that you're fighting and just put a lot of transfiguration stacks on them and then use Soul Touch. So it's not going to be the best when there's domains that just, you know, kind of shred at the HP naturally. But then for PvP, this domain expansion is honestly also going to be alright. I'll probably rate it like a 7 or 6.5 out of 10 for PvP too. If you just save your transfiguration stacks from your base when you're not popping your domain to when you're popping your domain, and then you also hit them when you're inside the domain with like literally any skill or any M1 attacks, you can also get more orbs on them and just burst it. This domain expansion, it's good. Like, I would just call it a good domain. For PvP, it's solid. I would rate it like a 6.5 to a 7 out of 10 for PvP. And like I said, a 6 to a 6.5 for PvE as well. So it's just a good domain expansion. And now we're on to the last domain expansion, and this is going to be Infinite Void. Now, I'm pretty sure most people know what Infinite Void does, but just in case you don't, this domain expansion, it essentially just stuns you. If you cast this domain expansion and you actually live it on the person is just stunned, completely immobilized for a set duration inside this domain expansion. Now, the old Infinite Void, you'll be stunned for around 30 seconds, but with this one, you're honestly stunned for, I would say, like 15 seconds to 10 seconds. This domain expansion did get nerfed. It's not as great as it used to be to me, because before, if you get caught in this domain expansion, you just lose the fight, but now you actually won't. So the best thing I would say, or the best way to use this domain expansion, I would say, is to use it with a high damaging skill added on to Infinite Void. So I'm talking like Hollow Purple, I'm talking World Cleave, I'm talking Hollow Purple Ultimate Nuke. I would use those skills stacked on top of Ultimate Void, or Unlimited Void, my bad, or even Jacob's Ladder. So regarding PvE, this is a domain that will just stun the boss for like 10 to 15 seconds. For PvE, I'll call this domain like alright. I mean, every single NPC is going to be standing still. If you use it on like the boss battle, I'm pretty sure that I'm not sure how bosses actually interact with like domain expansions and stuff like that. But if you do use it for like a boss battle, it'll probably do alright. I mean, even for just grinding mobs itself, just keeping them still, it's not like mobs are going to be moving around that much. So I wouldn't really call it like the best for PvE. If anything, for PvE, I'll call it like a 4 out of 10, or maybe even a 5 out of 10, because just keeping them still, it's not as good as you would think it is. Like, it's pretty alright to me for PvE. And then for PvP, this can honestly be like probably one of the best domains for PvP. If you're fighting a person and you're able to keep them still and do anything you want, I'm pretty sure that's just good no matter what you do. If you use this domain expansion for PvP and you're stunning the opponent and using it the right way, being like dishing out a high damaging skill or hitting them with like all 5 black flashes and going into your maximum and then doing the hollow purple nuke, then yeah, this domain expansion would be pretty good. For PvP, I'm honestly probably gonna rate it like a 10 out of 10 because it literally just keeps the person still. I don't see how you can use this domain and do bad. For PvP, this could be the best domain. Like, honestly speaking, this might be the best domain for PvP besides like Star Rage and maybe Malevolent Shrine. But yeah, no, this domain expansion is super duper good for PvP, and for PvE, I think it's really lackluster. So hopefully these domain expansions like just make things clearer for you, or you were able to get like a highlight on what you want to use if you were to go a domain expansion. And if this video did help you, I do want to note I appreciate the support on my last 2 videos like greatly. I really do appreciate that. And if you do like this one, also feel free to like and subscribe, because I will be doing a tier list ranking every single curse technique from best to worst next. So thank you for watching this video. Hopefully it did help you, because I did see a lot of people asking in the comments like what domains should they be using, and thank you for watching.